Okay, hello everyone, welcome. It's been a little while since I've seen you all, so I hope you had a great spring break. Good week last week while I was out of town in my conference. Wanted to start by having a little check-in with you all about where we are in the class and kind of what's going to be happening in the next, well, this week basically, since we kind of have a big important deadline coming up in just a couple of days. So as far as the grading goes, let me start off by telling you that I have failed in my mission to catch up with grading, but it is the tippy top thing on my priority list. I've started grading, I started with assignment 5 actually, because it's just a little easier for me to grade than assignment 4. So I'm gonna, if you haven't got your grade for assignment 4 back, but you did get your grade for assignment 5, don't freak out, that's just me prioritizing things a little differently. The goal is to finish up assignment 5 and get assignment 4 graded by tomorrow. And I think that's a reasonable goal for me because on Wednesday we have our first iteration due for the project. And so here's what's going to happen this week in regards to that deadline. Sometime either tomorrow or it might be Wednesday morning before class, I'm going to email you a link to a different project, one that is not your own project, for you to be peer reviewing. So everybody in your group is going to get assigned to a different project, hopefully. That's my goal anyway. And then when you come to class on Wednesday, our goal is going to be to peer review everybody's project. So in class on Wednesday, you will be looking at somebody else's project. And you will be reviewing that project based on the 5 criteria that I went over before spring break relating to the project. I'm going to do it together with you, right? So I know you haven't done this before, so for the first time especially, I'd like for you to come here to class, do the peer review session with me, so that I can explain exactly what we're looking for and kind of have a good idea of how to go through this process. So that's what's going to happen for Wednesday's class. Once that's done, I am going to peer review all of them, all of the projects. So that'll take me a couple days. You should hear back from me by the end of the week, on Friday, hopefully, if not earlier, with your iteration 1 score, as well as all of the peer review feedback that I get when we do the peer reviews here in class. And I'd like to remind you all that this project is definitely, the grades of this project are not set in stone, right? If you get things wrong on iteration 1, that's very common. I kind of expect that to happen. But if you fix them up and make them better for iteration 2 and iteration 3, then I will give you those points back a lot of times. This is that kind of a project, right? Points are not gone forever. If you learn from your mistakes, fix the things that you've been told you need to fix, then you'll get those points back. If you don't listen and you let those problems persist, then I start taking off more and more points for having to tell you over and over again. So take that feedback seriously. It's very important. You know, your grade in this class is based on how well you follow the project guidelines, but also based on how well you follow the feedback you've been given from these peer reviews. And then once that's over, you'll start into it again. We'll go through the next iteration. We'll do this 2 more times. That's basically the class for here on out to the rest of the semester. Any questions about what's coming up later this week before I talk about something different? Yes? Okay. Yeah, great question. I'm expecting everybody in your group to go through that process that we talked about in class where, so your group together should brainstorm some tasks, right? And make some cards on your board and then assign those tasks to individual people within your group. I would expect everybody from your group to do at least one of those tasks, from creating a branch, writing the tests, implementing the code, and then pushing the branch. At least one of those, if not more, by the time the iteration's done. So that's what I'm looking for. There is other stuff involved as well. So one task that's kind of a collective group task is to make sure that you have that script that can compile and run your code from the command line. That only has to be done once, right? To make sure somebody in your group or you can tag team and work on that together maybe. But otherwise, I want you to treat this project like it's a job. I mean, that's kind of what I'm going for with these iterations. Is like, you know, I'm your boss. Prove to me that you've been doing work these last couple of weeks on this project. I want to see cards that show exactly what tasks everybody in your group has done. And I should be able to go find the code in the corresponding branches as well. That's what I'm looking for. Hope that helps answer your question. Any other questions I can address before? Yes?
Should we push the main to this iteration or just leave it out there?
That's a great question. I would say probably a little too early to push to main. Pushing to main would be when you feel like you've got something ready for the outside world to see. I would be a little surprised if you were able to crank out that much stuff in the first iteration. So keeping it on dev is probably more reasonable. As we get towards the end, I'll actually probably have a whole class about deployment, at which point in time it might make more sense for you to push to main. Yeah, great question. Any other questions I can address before we talk about files today? So, unlike before spring break when I was introducing all these new concepts to you and showing you all these new tools and expecting you to do these things on the homework assignment, what I'm going to talk to you today, and actually what I'm going to talk to you from, in class basically from here to the rest of the semester, if we're not doing peer reviews, is somewhat optional in the sense that I'm trying to introduce things that are useful to people on your projects. If you decide that that's not the direction you want your project to go in, then you're not obligated to use it, right? But I do try to cover some of the more common topics that I get asked about and introduce those to you in class so that you can use them in your projects. Some people are able to do this on their own. They don't need me to show them these things. That's fine too. I certainly don't, I'm certainly not going to stop you from exploring on your own and incorporating things into your programs. But the way that today is going to work, I'm going to talk about files for, I don't know, maybe 45 minutes to an hour at the most. Because after that, I would like to just kind of go around and check in with all the groups and see if anybody has any questions, see how the project's going, just have a little chat with the groups and give any assistance that I can before the upcoming deadline, before we end class today. So files is one of the things that I get asked about most often when it comes to working on these projects. The reason being, if you've already started working on the project, you probably understand that if I create a bank account and use it in my program, as soon as I stop the program, as soon as the program is over, that bank account poof disappears. It is gone, right? Any evidence that it ever existed is gone. So I can't, when I run the program the next time, I actually want to do some stuff. I have to create a new bank account. Or maybe you just got it hard-coded in, right? I think that's perfectly acceptable. If you get tired of having to go through the menu to create stuff that you can manipulate, it's perfectly acceptable to just hard-code in a few dummy bank accounts or dummy objects that you need and insert them into your program, maybe in the main method, just to kind of give yourself a head start, a boost on how to test things. But if we wish to solve this problem for good, we need to talk about persistence. And there's two ways that we can do persistence. So persistence refers to the fact that the data, once the program is over, will persist. We want it to live forever. We don't want it to poof, disappear when the program stops running. So the two main ways that we have to accomplish persistence are databases and files. I'm not going to do databases in this class. That's, of course, a very common tool that people use. I will leave that to upper level courses where it's more appropriate, I think, to talk about databases. I actually taught a database class for quite a long time, so I know plenty about how to use them. If you have questions, we'd love to chat with you about databases sometime. I just don't think it's an appropriate topic for this class, so we're going to talk about the other form of persistence, which is files, using files. And files are great for anytime you have a program that just needs to store a little bit of data. I think databases are the tool that you want to use if you have to store a lot of data, a lot of information, or if you have a lot of people using your program, a database is going to be a better choice. If you have a lot of people using your program and you're using a file, that can cause a bottleneck. That can cause restrictions to happen due to file access. So just something to keep in mind. For this project, though, I think files are perfect. These projects aren't huge. We're not expecting hundreds of people to use them. then it's just going to be a few people in your group. So I think files are a really, really good choice. And so let's talk about the basics of using files. We got two main operations that we need to discuss. We need to be able to open and read the contents of a file. This is something that I would have expected most, if not all of you, to have seen before, just because I know this is covered in 131, although not in a whole lot of detail. So I do plan to cover it in more detail than what's covered in the intro class. And then the new and perhaps more useful topic would be writing to a file. That's something that we don't talk about in 131, but a very useful part of using files. And then we'll talk about how to fit this into our program design, since that's something we care about as well. So what's the appropriate place in the code for this? How can we use this in our code appropriately, stuff like that. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to just make a dummy file for today, just to show you some basics. So I'm going to make a file in my Eclipse called file practice. Again, this is not intended to be used for any specific purpose other than just kind of playing around with using files. And so I'll start by putting my main method in here. We're going to start with reading files. And the nice thing about reading files is that you can just use your good friend Scanner. Scanner is great for reading the contents of files. In order to use Scanner, you first need to have a file class. You need to create an instance of the file class. And so the way that we do this would be to make a variable to store this file. And then typically in here we would put the path. So this is where it's located. And this follows the same syntax that we saw when you're navigating the command line. So where does it live? If you're working in Eclipse, right, then I can actually start by, if I just type the name of a file here, file.txt, then it's going to expect to find that file right here in the base of the project, right? If I want to access a folder, so you can actually create folders in your Eclipse projects, right? So maybe I'll create one called files. And I'll create a new file inside of this folder called file.txt. All right, so here's my file.txt. The way that I would access that, the path, would be I would need to stick the folder out front. Oh, it's files, plural, right? There we go. Plural. So step one, make sure you have the right path. Make sure you know where the file is. This is also something that is worthwhile being tested outside of Eclipse. If you're going to use files in your project, I think it's important to make sure that this still works when you run it via the command line as well. The path to access the file might be a little different depending on whether you're running this from Eclipse versus whether you're running this from the command line. That's something that's worth testing and tweaking if that's something that you're planning to use in your program. So Eclipse is mad at me about a couple of things. First, I got to do the import. And then once I create my scanner, I can just pass this file into it directly. It's pretty straightforward. It's going to be mad at me again for the import. And then I expect it to be mad about something else as well. We've actually already discussed this in a prior class. It wasn't too long ago, actually, a few weeks ago, I suppose. When using files, we have something that's called a checked exception, meaning that this can throw an exception and we have to deal with it. We have to deal with the case that this file is not found. So basically, Java is telling us, oh, you're using a file? Well, what do you want me to do if I can't find that file? There is a non-zero chance that I go to locate that file and it's not there. Somebody moved it, somebody deleted it, whatever the case may be. So what do you want me to do if that file is not there? Okay, we can deal with that. In fact, Eclipse is trying to help us out by giving us a couple of options. And if you remember from our discussion before, the two options that we have available to us, this first one is passing the buck, right? The first one is almost never the one that I choose. It's basically saying, I know there's a problem here, but I'm not going to deal with it. I'm going to throw it to somebody else to deal with. I much prefer the second option, which is to use a try-catch block. So here, yeah, we can print out a stack trace, but we can also print out a message that says file not found, so that we know that if we get here, it's because it couldn't find this. If it can, then we're ready to actually do some work. And the nice thing about using scanner is that I can read in, in.next, or in.nextInt, or in.nextDouble, or whatever the case may be. We'll talk about the format of the files in a little bit. But this is where the actual work goes, and I'm not even going to spend a whole lot of time talking about it, because I feel like you've probably done this before. And even if you haven't, it's not terribly tricky. Once you get that data, let's say I have, a couple of values, right? Then I can use those to create whatever it is that I need to create. I'm kind of assuming that for the purposes of this project, we're storing bank accounts and how much money they have in them, right? Maybe who they belong to, stuff like that. So if I needed to, once I read this data in from the file, I can, create my new bank account. Passing in the stuff that I read. Right, this is all just fake non-functional code, just trying to give you the logic behind how to use files in our program. So that's reading files. Let's talk about writing files. That's a bit more complicated, and it's also not something I would have expected you to see before now. There's also lots and lots of different ways to do it. I'm going to introduce one way. It's not the way that you have to use if you choose to incorporate files into your code, but it is definitely very simple, definitely very straightforward. So let's talk about the print writer class. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and go one step farther and pull up the API for it, since I don't have all these methods memorized, right? I also have to look up the documentation when I need to remember how to do stuff. So it gives you a little bit of an explanation here. It says it also accepts a file, so that's good. So it's actually going to be kind of the same way. If you want to, write to a file, first thing you need to do is create this file object. And then you need to create a print writer. Probably need to import that. And just like last time, we have the same issue with the exception, right? It's telling us, what if the file's not found? How can I write to a file that's not there? And I'm going to solve it the same way, using a try-catch. At this point in time, we can use the print writer object to call print, or maybe more appropriately, print line, and then just plug in, whatever values we want. So this can be a string, it can be an int, it can be anything really, right? What do we want it to be? We want it to be information from our program. So print writer works very well with our good friend toString. So as a little refresher, toString is a method that all classes have. All classes have a toString method. If you don't specify what you want the toString method to look like, then it just uses a generic, Java-provided form of toString, which is not very useful for humans. So typically what we like to do is write our own toString method to provide a string representation of this object. And right now, the only thing that this object really contains is a balance. I suspect that that might change as this project grows. Maybe there'll be an ID number, maybe there'll be a customer name, maybe there'll be some other instance variables here associated with this bank account in the future. But right now, all we really have is this instance variable balance, and so I might just return this dot balance as all that I really need. We do need it to be a string, so kind of this feels a little hacky, but it works. Just concatenate it to an empty string. And then the nice thing about having this toString method is that when you want to print stuff out to a file, if I have this bank account, what is the constructor? Is it just the default? Oh yeah, it is just the default. My fault. Then we can just stick that object directly into the print statement, right? Stick that object directly into the print statement, and now whatever the toString for that object is will be placed directly into the file. In fact, why don't I prove this to you by showing you some stuff? Alright, let me run this code and hopefully it will not throw any errors and do what I want. Okay, it ran, didn't throw any errors. Let's open up the file and see if anything actually... Oh, it didn't. Bummer. What happened? Oh, I think I might know what I forgot to do. There's one step that I forgot, which is to close the print writer. If you forget to do this, you'll see something similar to exactly what just happened to me. The output may not actually get written out to the file. So calling close is what it does. Something called flushing the print writer, making sure that everything that needs to be written out is actually getting written out. Let me try and run this again now and see if it's actually going to write some stuff. There we go. Yes. Perfect. Made a bank account, deposited $200 in it, and it then wrote that out to a file. So as I mentioned, there are lots of other ways you can do this, writing stuff out to a file, but I believe this to be one of the most simple, convenient ways of doing it, using the print writer in conjunction with toString of an object. And so that kind of brings us to our last question, which is, where should all this stuff happen? So again, I'm kind of making some assumptions that the information you're writing to a file is about the bank accounts, right? And so I'm also going to make an assumption that maybe somewhere in your code you've got a list of bank accounts or an array of bank, like some kind of a collection of bank accounts, right? There's going to be more than just one, and we wish to keep track of those in a file. Keep track of all those bank accounts in a file, so that if when I close the program and reopen it again, those bank accounts still exist. You can still see the money that's in them, still access them, and perform whatever operations I choose on those particular accounts. So think about what that means in terms of the flow of the program. When we start the program, it's going to be empty. It's not going to remember anything until we tell it to examine the file. So the first thing that we need to do when the program starts is to have it read all that information in from a file. And then once the program is over, we need to make sure that the information gets put back into the file. Now we can actually write to the file more often than that if we want to. I think for the purposes of this program, reading once at the beginning and writing once at the end is probably sufficient. There are potential problems though. Consider if I log into your program, I make some changes, maybe deposit some money into a bank account, and then the program crashes. Right? Found a bug, program crashes. I didn't exit the official way, so the changes that I made aren't going to get written. Because, I said I'm only going to write the changes when I exit the program. But if I exit via a crash, then I risk losing any of those changes since they wouldn't have gotten written out. So some people respond to that by saying, all right, anytime somebody makes a change, I'm going to update that file. So anytime I make a single deposit, I'll just write everything out to a file. You can do that. That is definitely a thing you can do, but keep in mind that that comes with the performance penalty. Writing out to a file is not free. It takes time. For the purposes of this project, you may not even notice. If you're only dealing with a handful of bank accounts, you probably wouldn't notice. But if you actually use this with lots of people, lots of bank accounts, you would notice. You would notice that lag required to write. Plus, you're also doing a lot of redundant work. You're writing the entire file every single time. It turns out that changing just a single piece of data within a file is a lot more difficult of a task to do. You know, it's possible. In fact, I might even chat with you about it a little bit later on. But for our purposes, I would recommend reading the entire file in and writing the entire file out. Once at the very beginning and once at the very end. So in terms of what that means for our program, I believe that's probably going to be part of the menu system. So the menu system is where my main method is, right? You can see I've created the menu here, and then I display the options. I think what I need to do before I display the options is to read in the data. I don't want to display the options and ask the user to make some decisions until I read in that data. And the other thing to think about is, okay, when does this end? So somewhere in the menu, I don't think I actually have this yet, but if you've created a menu system somewhere, you probably have a way for the user to exit. Select option 3 to exit or whatever. So wherever that is happening, you would want to do main menu dot write data. These methods obviously don't exist yet, but they can be created as part of the menu class. In fact, that's probably what Eclipse is offering to do for me. So let's do that. Private void read data. Here we'd want to create file, create scanner, and read in the data and create bank account updates. And then for the other method for writing data, you can think about what that would entail as well. Create the file, create print writer, iterate through all bank accounts, and write them. So of course your project's a little different than mine. You've hopefully progressed along your project farther than what I've done, since this is just the starter code that I gave you all before spring break. But if you want to update your code, this is what I would suggest. And also, I mean, just to be clear, this is all somewhat predicated on the idea that you've got a linked list of bank accounts, right? To handle more than one bank account. Although if you don't have that, if you just have one bank account that you're keeping track of, this would still work. There's nothing wrong with it. Now the other thing that I'll mention just briefly is that case where, let's imagine, for whatever, let's say I've got 1,000 bank accounts to this thing, and somebody walks up and they want to make a deposit or make a withdrawal, and I want to reflect that fact. I'm reading in all 1,000 accounts, and I'm writing out all 1,000 accounts, just so one person can make one change in their data, right? So it's kind of a waste. It's kind of a waste to read in all of that extra stuff, and kind of a waste to rewrite all of that extra stuff, when the only thing that's changing is maybe one little piece of it, right? So if that is something that bothers you and you want to take this up a notch, the next thing to do would be to incorporate something called random access file. Using a print writer and scanner, they're one-way streets. We start at the beginning of the file and we progress to the end of the file. I can't go backwards. Once I've read in that information from the file, you probably remember this from 131, doing like the zombies lab and stuff. Once you've read in that data from a file, you've consumed it. You can't go backwards and say, hey, what was that again? That doesn't exist. Random access file gives you the ability to jump around. So you actually can go backwards. You can go to a specific spot in the file. This is all very useful. However, this requires a lot more care with formatting. Which is important anyhow, even if you're not using a random access file to read and write your data. The format still matters. Just like I keep referencing the zombie lab, but it's a good reference for those of you who have gone through that assignment in CSE131. The data comes in a particular order, right? For the lab, it was like X coordinate, Y coordinate, whether you are live or not. For this, it's probably going to be like account number, balance, customer name. Honestly, it doesn't really matter. It's up to you as a group to decide what that file format should be, but it has to be consistent. Has to be consistent. The order that you read those values in from the file needs to be exactly the same as the order that those values are going to be written to the file. Otherwise, the code isn't going to work. You can't mix and match the formats, right? With random access files, that gets to be even trickier because you're jumping to a specific point in the file, but how do you know what's actually there? How do you know which position in the file you need to jump to? It can be tricky to make those kinds of determinations. So that's kind of why I make the disclaimer that the random access file is going to require a heck of a lot more care with formatting. I really think it's overkill for this project. I think that using print writer is probably the way to go for writing out data to files. Is anybody considering using files on their project? Yeah, see, few names, that's good. It's a pretty simple, straightforward thing to do, and one that many groups have successfully done in the past. So I highly encourage you to do it, go that route. If that's something that your group is interested in incorporating as part of the project. If it's not, that's fine too. There are plenty of directions this project can go, and I want to give you some creativity, some flexibility in terms of direction. So I'm not going to tell you that you have to do this stuff, but I do think it is a very viable thing to be done. Does anybody have any questions about this process? Cool. All right. Yeah. That's really all I had for you today. I am not going to lecture for the entire hour and 20 minutes anymore. That's just not what this class is. I want to make sure that you're working on this project. So please, I'm begging you, stick around for at least a little bit and check in with your group before you leave. I know it's tempting to get this time back. I have other homework assignments you want to work on. I have other stuff I want to work on too. I'm going to stay here. I would love to chat with you about how things are going on the project. I would love to see people checking in with their groups just to make sure everything's moving smoothly. First deadline's on Wednesday, so hopefully you've already made some progress. If you haven't, then absolutely you should be talking to groups, making sure that you know what's happening between now and Wednesday. Okay? Thanks everyone. I'll be around to chat. You of course are not required to stay. It's not part of your grade or anything, but I would love to chat with you all about how the project is going.